It isn't just that they want to make money. They want this information. And remember, Musk was part of the same group. So when he came in, the whole Doge stuff had nothing to do with efficiency. It was all about hoovering up information.
Mic check, everybody. I'm Eric, and welcome back to Corruption Inc. So today, we're starting to talk about Palantir in particular, everything that represents. So, I mean, Palantir, from where the name comes from, it's a Lord of the Rings reference. It's those seeing stones, if you remember in the movies. But anyway, point is, these seeing stones are these things that can see everywhere where they're planted, and so much so that they can actually enter the mind of a person who's touching it. And I think the important part of geeking out there for just a moment is to understand the metaphor, because that is what they're using to communicate who they are when they're getting into the government's data and doing whatever it is that they need to do there. So Elon's gone now, and it's been an ugly breakup, and what have you. But nevertheless, when Elon was there running Doge, I mean, what was that all about? And we discussed this several times. It was more about destroying the regulatory and law enforcement mechanisms that were there to protect us in the country from corporate entities, coming in and creating havoc and running, roughshod over us by not doing basic protections, on consumer products, or by making sure that certain industries weren't going to be regulated. And even if they were regulated, that there wouldn't be any meaningful law enforcement around them. So it just opens the door for corporate malfeasance and corporate corruption on a massive level. And what's interesting about that is, if you think about it, is that they're trying to get to a point to where it's like you don't even need government corruption because it's not there. In our discussion about anarcho-capitalism, which Peter Thiel, who is also one of the main folks, owners of Palantir, has stated it quite clearly, that he has zero interest in there being any government whatsoever, that we are all to be subjects of corporate fiefdoms, kind of going back to pre-Magna Carta days, but only in the digital version, for whatever that's worth. But Elon came in, basically destroyed the regulatory and law enforcement regimes, especially as it pertains to white-collar crime. And not only that, he basically broke all the silos of information that kept your and my information from being in contact with one another. It's like, the IRS wouldn't be able to, have shared information, with the Health and Human Services for whatever it is that might be. Who knows? But the point is that we were protected from government overreach on a person-by-person basis because they didn't share personal information. But with all those structures gone, all it takes is exactly what Palantir is in order to collect all of that into meaningful data for somebody to exploit. And that's what we're looking at here. And it's not only that. I mean, when we're talking about Palantir, I mean, they were first and foremost the Department of Defense contractor. And, not that means that you're good or bad or otherwise. It just is. And that there's like a certain, shall we say, militarized stance, shall we say, of what their products do and how they try to use them. So to say that we're in a position to where our data has a potential of being weaponized against us is not hyperbole, but that's where we are. Anyway, I spoke with Bill Black about this, and we felt that it was an important enough discussion to bring to you all. So I hope you enjoy it. We'll see you at the end. Hello, everybody. So once again, we are here with William K. Black, Bill Black, who is, of course, a white-collar criminologist, a former federal regulator, a university professor on economics, and lawyer. But I just wanted to get your first, thoughts and impressions about Palantir being involved with fraud protection or fraud detection with Fannie Mae.
Irony is not dead. It is, the force is strong with this one. Yes, Palantir is one of at least 5 companies he's named out of Tolkien characters or entities, tropes in his thing. So let's start with the broader point. Peter Thiel always does the opposite of what he claims is his life mission, right? So his life mission is as the uber-libertarian. I mean, such a libertarian that he really, really, really has given up on the concept of democracy, right? Openly. Now, one of the reasons is they let the damn women vote, right? And, they, women, tend to not be libertarians at the same rate as men. So that was, made the prospects of democracy ever producing good results dimmer and dimmer. And so we've got to give up. So what do we got to do is live forever. I'm literally, right? His biggest thing is we need to find a way to live forever. And he means like within his lifetime, of course, so that he will live forever. And part of the reason is he's almost completely given up on Earth as a place you could ever have democracy. Right. So if you live forever, then the technology would develop. Maybe it would take 1 million years where you could live in space somewhere, in which you got rid of all the bad people, not get rid, you just didn't give them a place on your vessel, them. Right? So if you're familiar with seasteading, is that a familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is super seasteading.
Right, space steading.
So this somewhere in the cosmic realm, where no government can reach us at all, and then we could be safe. Right? Because we got to have the absolute ability to do what we want. So that's 1. 2, he really, 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 really is in favor of privacy. So much so that he famously and he's a super in favor of the First Amendment, which is why he put Gawker out of business.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Because
just
it
today,
outed him, as a gay male type of thing. So he financed Hulk Hogan's suit and bankrupted Gawker. So he really, really, really believes in this stuff, but he makes all his money overwhelmingly from government. Apropos Fannie and Freddie in particular, he says that great thing I was doing with PayPal, and this is the broader point is the PayPal mafia, as it's called.
Right.
This is all his key allies and lieutenants who are all over the place. And, one guy's the Elon Musk. You may have heard of him recently as we do this. Well, those folks, that again was, we can't have government doing stuff. Whenever the government does stuff, and the world is inherently a worse place. But they market their services increasingly towards government.
Right, the government. So, this so often is the case, right? The people who hate government the most just can't wait to get involved with government.
Right. And it follows, actually, because what they think is the people in government are morons.
Right.
Or that they can corrupt the senior officials, like the President of the United States. Or that they can just get all this incredibly valuable information through the government, and then they can use it for both getting political power and economic wealth, right? In all of these things. And so they have always a story, and the story is always some extreme form of libertarian stuff. Like when he writes about PayPal, did you know that PayPal was the great libertarian thing? And it's a great libertarian thing because you no longer have to use banking. Except that the first thing they want to know if you sign up for PayPal is what your bank is.
Right.
The transactions actually need the bank type of thing. So there's always this story, and the story is always the opposite of the truth. It's not just different than the truth, it's the opposite of the truth. So in particular, just a moment before to Fannie and Freddie, although Fannie and Freddie is an example of this, they want to help government find out every frigging thing you have ever done.
Right. So, before we get too deep into this, and I know that this is like could potentially be an exceptionally long answer, but if you could just very encapsulate what Fannie and Freddie are, just really quickly.
Okay, Fannie and Freddie are quasi-governmental. That means they ain't governmental, but there's an implicit federal guarantee. They're way too big to fail. And so we have, in fact, bailed them out in the great financial crisis. They don't need to exist. There are private sector entities, pure, they were bailed out too, entities that buy mortgages from individual banks, and then they package them to create something called mortgage-backed securities. And theoretically, that could be a good thing because you get diversification. And then those mortgage-backed securities, they either hold or they resell to others. And they have a number of attractive investment characteristics. So that's basically what they do.
Right. Just to like add just like one extra layer. One of the things that made their products different than from some other banks was that they had certain standards, at least at one point they did, that were the kind of the gold standard as far as like keeping track, as far as like the mortgages that would be involved with their securities. And
right. So the creation story, which is actually true in this case, again, they weren't essential, but they did something intelligent when the first one was created. The second one was actually created out of the other one. It was very, very Greek. the God creating the God type of thing. Allegedly to create competition, although it's not clear that you would want competition between two federal government-sponsored entities, but hey.
Right.
What they did intelligent was ask and check with data what loan underwriting characteristics, that's what do you do before you make the loan. It's the 3 C's, collateral, credit quality, that type of thing. And do you have the capacity, the income to repay the loan? And they didn't set it at a peak, but they set it at a level where loan defaults were very unusual. And that meant that their bonds, the mortgage-backed securities, and they also issue bonds to raise funds, both of those things were very unlikely to default. Right. And as you say, that became the de facto standard, and it was a good one. It wasn't set so high that it was really difficult to meet. Hence, we had the largest housing market in the world, by far. I don't mean just bigger. I mean more Americans were able to buy homes. Like if you're in Japan, the percentage of people that own homes, even today, is tiny. The middle class owned homes when you and I were growing up, especially when I was growing up.
Right.
I'm older than you, type of thing. Okay, and so it wasn't set at an impossibly high standard, but it was set at a standard where defaults were very unusual, and we don't want defaults. Not many, very certainly. And bad for the borrower, bad for the banks, bad for the global economy.
And because of that, the MBSs that they created were pretty safe. And
right. So that's the mortgage-backed securities. They were super safe, in fact. Right.
You know, and I don't want to necessarily kind of go too much into stuff that's in the con per se, but just as a general background. So now, fast forward to today, and Palantir wanting to get into fraud detection.
Yeah, so this actually is relevant. So I needed to tell the super short version of this. Please. Palantir, Thiel's, and the whole right wings has a story about Fannie and Freddie that is false. And the story about Fannie and Freddie is, oh, this was all good, but then we made them make loans to black people and brown people. And, oh my God, that's insane. You know, and there were all these defaults, and that's what killed Fannie and Freddie and led to the big bailout. All right, so that's their story, and that's very much Peter Thiel's story. That's not what happened. In fact, what killed Fannie and Freddie was the same thing that killed the commercial banks, and that was liar's loans. And in a liar's loan, it's the lender and its agent, the loan broker, that put the lies in liar's loans by inflating the borrower's income. It's not the borrower. The borrower doesn't even know the number they have to hit. Only the loan broker does, and the banks created all kinds of deliberate, perverse incentives to ensure that the loan broker would get very rich as long as he did this. Plus, remember what the scam is. Inflating the borrower's income dramatically so the loan looks safer. Does that help you meet standards for lending to poor people? If you're inflating the borrower's income enormously?
Right.
It's the opposite.
Absolutely not right.
It's a complete BS story. But that's Thiel, and so Thiel is saying this, oh, look, there was fraud. Yes, there was enormous fraud by the looters, the elite CEOs, and the loan brokers. Exactly. But Thiel isn't going to say that. No, it's by the borrowers that must be committing the fraud. So he creates a mechanism for something that hardly exists at all, in which he's going to get a ton of money because Fannie and Freddie are vast for doing nothing useful, but way beyond that, he's going to hoover up vast amounts of information through this process, which he's going to use to make money and to have more effective political ads. You know, how do you target potential voters and such? So again, it's never the supposed story. Any tale you get from Peter will be the cover story.
Right.
And he will be doing exactly the opposite.
Right. Because one of the things that when I was first looking into the story what Palantir is going to be doing, so basically they're going to be document scrubbing, right? And so they're going to be scrubbing through documents, trying to find patterns of irregularities and so on and so forth, and then flagging things. Now, the thing about this is that even if it is the lender who's putting in the number in whatever part of the form that they are needing to put that number in, I have a hard time feeling that any kind of enforcement that would come out of this would go after the lender, but would rather go after the borrower.
Yes, and again, remember, it wasn't Fannie and Freddie buying this paper. The liar's loans were overwhelmingly purchased by folks who were not in the public sector, even in the quasi-public sector. There was regular banks that did it, but Fannie and Freddie did some, and even that some, that much smaller group, the losses were so massive in liar's loans, they produced roughly 65% of total losses.
Right. Right.
So, yes, this is not designed to protect taxpayers. It ain't designed to protect Fannie and Freddie's shareholders, right? This is just a dual thing. One, they're going to make a ton of money selling a service
Right.
that is not needed, that the 3 C's work just fine, and Fannie and Freddie have mechanisms because we banned liar's loans, right? That ban remains, so it's not any significant problem. We can check the borrower's income, and banks can do that easily and such. So there's nothing significant added by the screen. It's redundant. It's not necessary. But again, it's the fictional tale.
Right.
The real tale is getting access to all of this information and making a ton of money.
Well, so now what it kind of like seems like to me. So I remember. So in the film, In the Name of the Father, about the Guilford Five. That was the Daniel Day-Lewis star. There's this one scene where the police constable, I don't know, whatever it was called, was talking to an investigator, and because they were trying to get prosecutions for this bombing that occurred. And it came out that they were looking for people who definitely were not part of the IRA, and that then the barrister or whatever the lawyer is called says, wait a second. They said, yeah, they were definitely they definitely wanted to like only people who were definitely not part of the IRA, and and it's because
the Irish trial lawyers are called barristers,
right. And it's because ascertaining actual guilt was never the point. The point was to do the dog and pony show. And so when with what you just described, it's this concept of like, oh, all these borrowers are defrauding people is the pretext by which they're just coming in, getting this big fat contract and hoovering up all this data, then as you said before, that they'll then be able to use for massively profitable things later on down the road. And maybe they're going to Fannie and Freddie specifically because they know that there's probably going to be very little fraud.
Yeah, they'll be immensely successful.
Right.
Because Fannie and Freddie are already immensely successful in preventing this fraud, and we have 20 years of experience past the great financial crisis, and there ain't no crisis there. This is just an opportunity to make money. But it's worse than that, because these guys don't just want to make money. These people are virulent opponents of democracy. They hate democracy. They view democracy as the great threat. And to come back to, the PayPal.
And you're not just saying that. That's not hyperbole in any way, shape, or form. You can go on YouTube right now, look them up, and they will say exactly that.
They will say exactly that, but on top of that, right, Peter Thiel and the PayPal mafia includes this whole group of folks whose formative years were spent in South Africa, in white South Africa, in which they were supporters of the white South African movements, which were explicit supporters of Hitler. Indeed, Peter, of all of them, actually spent many of his formative years in what was then called Southwest Africa, Namibia. Mm-hmm. In a particular town, Namibia, Southwest Africa, it was once a German colony, right? In a particular town in which it was the norm when you met another white person to say Heil Hitler.
I think I have read that one also, and I think that they were saying that even the buildings are like, if you were to like go there, that it basically looks like you're in Munich or something, So
oh yeah, you'll have swastikas and the whole 9 yards even today. And his father was a minor engineer of mining. uranium mining. So this is a place where the black workers were literally being worked to death for incredibly low wages, and they missed the good old days, is the whole thrust of this, folks. So this is a group of folks that are highly bigoted. They see the problem as dark-skinned people. They see the solution as white-skinned people ruling because they supposedly are a hyper-meritocracy. And so it isn't just that they want to make money. They want this information. And remember, Musk was part of the same group. So when he came in, the whole Doge stuff had nothing to do with efficiency. It was all about hoovering up information.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I've mentioned that several times on this program, where it's like it became very clear very early on that Doge's main purpose was to break the back of regulation wherever it could and de-silo every pool of information that the government was keeping separate from other departments of the government. And basically, once that job was done, it's kind of where this pseudo drama between Elon and Trump is sort of happening. That seems like whatever. But here comes Palantir to then come in and then have the exact right software solution to go gather all this data, collect it, and then be able to create the profiles of people, right? I mean, that's what we're...
Exactly. And again, this is why we talk about the 3 Ds: deregulation, desupervision, and de facto decriminalization. And that's what they're achieving. And this is not the only thing Palantir does. The other big thing that Palantir is moving towards is surveillance services for government.
All right. I mean, their start was in Department of Defense, like strategic software, wasn't it?
Yes, and they have openly said that we have chosen our allies, and essentially, therefore, we have chosen our enemies. Right. And, the people of the world are the enemies.
Right.
And any quasi-fascist state, or anywhere they can push it away from democracy, which again, they see democracy as the great danger, because democracy could bring real regulation, real supervision, and real prosecutions. And they know that. So what they really want is to not just hoover up the stuff to make money, but to be able to sell themselves in what's their actual biggest business, which is bigger than Fannie and Freddie, which is the security business. They want to sell themselves to totalitarian states as we're the experts. And they are in competition with Black Cube. I don't know if that's a familiar name, but Black Cube is the group largely a former Mossad, Israel's equivalent of the CIA.
Yes.
And they, for example, sold themselves to Viktor Orban, the pro-fascist Hungarian leader. Now remember, these are Israelis and they're Jewish,
right?
Which is kind of important, because what I'm about to say, because what Orban wanted specifically from them was the ability to get dirt or seeming dirt on the pro-democracy groups in Hungary, particularly those funded by George Soros. And George Soros is ethnically, a Hungarian Jew, and ethnically and religiously. So Israelis working for a virulent anti-Semite to destroy another Jew because he's pro-democracy. So that's Black Cube, and that's their big rival in all of this. So both of them are working to hoover at more information through all kinds of projects to be able to sell themselves to the security services as, look, what we can do is a composite. We can find all the whistleblowers. We can find all the sources that are talking to the newspaper. And then you can jail them or ruin their lives or kill them, imprison them, whatever you like. But we will get you the dirt. And in the U.S. context, let's just give you 2 examples of black cube being used by formerly the top trial lawyer in America, David Boies, who was often considered to be kind of progressive, but Harvey Weinstein hired Black Cube to get dirt, embarrassing information on the women who were victimized.
Right.
That's one.
This is right.
2 was, and this one is, I just love for its awfulness, right? This is Elizabeth Holmes, right? And Theranos, the blood testing, complete control fraud, looting that we've talked about, classic, right?
Right.
But the key here is the way she pulled this, Elizabeth Holmes, the CEO of Theranos, pulled off this complete fraud. I mean, it's every single aspect of what they did was fraudulent, right? She created this board of directors to give her seeming legitimacy. And this was the board of directors from a right-wing Valhalla, right? Including George Shultz, the former Secretary of State. Well, life is bizarre, and anybody who says, like cop shows, there are no coincidences, stop watching. That's the stupidest thing in the world. There's bazillion coincidences. And when we make cases, as enforcers or prosecutors, we've got to rule out coincidence as a result. So this coincidence is George Shultz had a grandson who was a biochemist, and he, helped send him to Theranos. And he was an honest person, and he was competent, unlike Elizabeth Holmes, who had 1 grand year of biology before she dropped out of school and adopted a fake voice, right? I'm a man. And I dress like Steve Jobs, so I must be telling the truth. So the grandson goes to his grandfather and says, I have actually seen this supposed breakthrough. It is a complete scam. There is no breakthrough. It does not work. It cannot work. It has never worked. It will never work. And his grandfather turned on him and allowed David Boies to use Black Cube to try to intimidate and get him to bend the knee, the grandson to bend the knee. Can you imagine trying to destroy your grandson?
Yeah.
Who's telling you the absolute truth and coming, has no incentive to lie to you, is coming and has the real expertise, is the insider, has seen the fraud from the inside, is disgusted by it, and you say, but she's pretty.
Right. So, I mean, there's so many things going on there, right? It's like, one, you probably have a man with an immense ego who can't possibly fathom that he's that wrong about something.
He was also 98 at the time to 102.
Right. And then, I mean, what is it with companies that put black at the start of their name? I mean,
I resent that.
To be fair, that's your second. That's your last. That's your surname. Now, if it was Black Bill Black, or Black Bill, but yeah, it just seems so crazy that it's like, okay, Black Cube, Black Knight, Black Water, Black Stone, Black Rock. I mean,
no, just, as a serious answer to your question, yes, they want to advertise that they are slimy because their whole business model is, I will be slimier than our competitors. And I've just tried to explain that Gresham's dynamic, right, that we've talked about, in which bad ethics drives good ethics out of the marketplace, except there's no good ethics. It's horrendous ethics drive awful ethics out of the marketplace, and they ratchet and they ratchet and they ratchet. And again, all of these people claim to be extreme libertarians, where they're not only making money from the government, they're turning the government into the monster Leviathan that they claim to hate.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's an age-old story, there as well.
Yeah, but nobody had the tech in the old days to
Oh,
actually
no,
pull it
no.
off.
Well, yeah,
Nowadays, I mean, whatever you think about Mossad, think about the technical skills and to some degree human skills to be able to do those pager attacks and then
Right.
the walkie-talkie attacks. I mean, for one thing, when you go through an airport, what happens in a screening?
All right. They go and they search for anything that could possibly, be.
Well, they've got
an
a
explosive.
sniffer
Right.
that sniffs for the types of things that explosive gives off into the air.
Sure.
How many people use an airport?
Right.
A ton of people. So they had to, be extraordinarily competent. And they're
And that was
turning
Blatant that did that operation.
well, it was Mossad.
Right.
We don't know if there's some special subsection technical thing, that is only Mossad
the skill
adjacent.
set comes from the same place.
My point is,
Mossad,
this is the kind of people.
Yeah.
We're not talking about Trump type people, right? So Peter Thiel got in on merit to Stanford undergrad, Stanford Law, and he was a top ranked junior chess player, right?
Sure.
This is someone who is really smart. And he isn't on some ketamine wacko thing that means that he can't function. So these are the most dangerous people. Right? They're even more dangerous than the clowns.
Right. No, far more, because they do know what they're doing. And
and they have no ethical barriers. The things they claim are their transcendent thing in life, they violate routinely for money.
Well, let me ask you this, and this, I don't want to get into too much speculation and hyperbole or anything like that. It's, but, everything that's described, one, it's like, we're starting off with Palantir. It's a fantasy, thing, and everything that these guys tend to gravitate to, like, seems to, like, it edge towards science fiction and that sort of a thing. But everything that's been described in this conversation, it seems like it could, whether it does or not, it could easily be something that is laying the groundwork for a surveillance and a police state, in our country.
Am I wrong? Isn't that exactly what Palantir is?
Well, yeah, that's
in
what
the
I'm
word,
saying.
Isn't it the globe that, right? Isn't it the globe
Yeah,
thingy?
yeah, it's the seeing stone.
It's the all-seeing stone that
Word
turns you
cred
mad.
Yeah.
He chose that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Not a critic.
And it was what Sauron used to read the minds of the people who were in contact with it. It's like,
yes.
Like more nerd cred there, but hey.
We are not hyperventilating on this stuff. They're not saying the quiet part out loud. They scream it. They make it their logo.
Right.
To not be able to understand, to pretend as a government official that you don't know what's going on with all of this lacks all credibility unless, and this could be the defense, they are illiterate morons that never read any of the trilogy and beyond.
Right. So, okay, so
Or
just
saw the
like,
movies.
Kind of like looking broader, right?
Or played the games.
So Palantir is involved with all sorts of stuff. I think I know that they've been involved with the Department of Defense for a long time, but after Trump came into office, one of the first places that most people really started to hear the name Palantir was having to do with ICE, and then especially when like ICE and IRS databases or something like that were being mixed. Now, once again, I'm not sure how much they necessarily care about that, except for the fact that, hey, it's going after brown people, so wonderful. As much as, was that also probably a pretext to just gain information, to just like,
well, it's both.
to have
they want
the cover
relationships.
story. Right.
They want relationships. They want reputation. as I said, we have the phrase is, we have chosen which side we're on.
Right.
And we are on the side of the despots. They want that reputation, right? We will reliably do sleazy things.
Right. And once again, this isn't hyperbole. You go online or you pull up. I mean, they proudly say these exact things. Anybody who's watching this, don't take our word for it. Go out, find them. They are saying these exact things. This is not like us like putting words in their mouth.
No.
Or
We're
gathering
quoting
their,
them.
right.
I'm quoting
exactly.
them. I may be a word off, in the exact phrase, but that's just the limits of memory. I have gotten accurately captured exactly what they're saying,
Yes.
and that's the point. They want to have a reputation that they will do this stuff and they don't care. So think of one of the most recent ones where they grabbed the kid the day before he was going to play at the graduation or something.
Was it the volleyball player?
His father was arrested for speeding.
Right.
Right? And they seized the kid. Now, how in God's name did they know who the kid was? Kid doesn't even have ID problem. That's from these kinds of data sets.
Right.
That create those interconnections.
So every time we're hearing
And that
these
has
things,
to be on a essentially real-time basis, right? That you call in, and I've stopped this person. You have the driver's license, presumably, for the father, and they run it, and there's automatically a run for any ICE-related matter, which includes any kids.
right.
So that's actually, again, pretty impressive. If the news reports are correct as to how the arrest, and the news reports come from ICE again.
Right. Right.
ICE lies about a lot of stuff, but if they're telling the truth, then it strongly suggests it was the fruits of this kind of information technology and gives you an idea of how close to real time and how incredibly broad and how incredibly vicious it is. So when some of their predecessors did this, it was Silicon Valley people. Something like hundreds of engineers revolted at Google when they were asked to do something like this. And that, again, is why you want to have a reputation as reliable anti-democratic, reliably pro-fascist.
Because you know who you want your clients to be.
Not only that, you don't want whistleblowers, right? This is always their fear.
Right. Right.
Right? So they want not Google-ish types that might go, this is horrible. I didn't go to school to help fascism, right? They want folks who perceive these people as the enemy, right? The anybody who's an immigrant.
Right. It's so it's a call to it informs.
I feel good. I'm not about to blow the whistle.
And so
I go home at the end of the day feeling good about myself.
Right, and if you're like a communications expert or a software engineer or something like that, and you're going to get a job with them, you know what they are.
Right. They want you to know. They want you to know.
And you're probably only going there if you're like, hell yeah, that is my jam. Yeah, that's pretty...
In economics, we call this signaling theory.
Yeah.
And again, if you think about it, the gravest strategic risk to them is hiring people who become whistleblowers. And by the way, should you be one of those people working for Palantir, please do become a whistleblower. Wait a while, collect the information, and then go public as hell.
Right. Yes, please. It's like, all right. Well, okay, so this was dark.
Sauron is kind of dark.
Yes.
And his Palantirs.
No, I 100% agree. And so, strangely, I suppose it is a very apt name.
All
for
two.
what it is and what they do.
Again, they're not trying to hide it.
Right.
This is one of those, if you got it, flaunt it moments.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess...
And the other jargon for this is self-selection.
Right, right.
You want your employees to self-select for sleaze, or as they would perceive it, for saving the white race.
Right, right. Principled. You want principled people, people who share your values. I guess it's kind of like.
Saving the white race, I think, is how they do it.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, to very clearly state like those principles and values. Yes, that seems to be the case. And like I said, I mean, I can't say this enough. We're not speaking out of turn when we're saying these things. It's like we're not like, you know, casting aspersions or anything like that. Please go and find them. They are saying these exact things, and that's perhaps what's scariest about this. Well, Bill, so once again, thank you very much. You know, it's always illuminating.
I always cheer you up.
Amidst this dark backdrop, but yeah, no, I mean it's incredibly important to understand these things, to know what we're dealing with, because if we're ever going to have a chance to do something about it, you know, we have to understand, which is, you know, why we did the con, which once again is always available on the links below. But also why we're doing this show right now, to kind of like make sure that we're like kind of having a better understanding as to what's going on in the moment, so that maybe we can have a better idea as to what to do about it.
And the costs of not enforcing the law and not having an effective rule of law.
Yeah.
You create a society like this in which the worst people no longer hide it, but want you to know how much they despise people who aren't like them.
Because that's where it all begins, right? I mean, when laws are broken and then never enforced, or when people get the idea that there isn't, you know, anything that's keeping them from breaking the law, you know, that just encourages that behavior. Just, we're in a stage right now where you know, the 3Ds need to be replaced by the 3Rs of, you know, recriminalization, re-supervision, and re-regulation. And we just need to find the people who have the political will to actually put the rule of law back in place, because if I recall correctly, the entire overriding concept of the United States as a country was to be a place that was ruled by law, not by people, not by individuals, not by power.
No kings. No kings, as the phrase goes. Yeah. So to paraphrase Bastiat, the French economist from centuries ago, you know, when predation becomes a way of life for men in society, they create a legal code that authorizes it and a moral code that valorizes it. And we're in the valorizing racism and fascism stage.
Thanks again, and we'll talk again soon. I'm sure one of these days we'll have like an episode that's talking about how great and wonderful it is that we're able to like stop this entire something or another, and you know, we can like, you know, be all happy and smiles about it.
Well, that comes back to one of our two slogans as savings and loan regulators, right? It is not necessary to hope in order to persevere.
Well, persevere we shall. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks. Take care.
All right.
So, what I'm taking away from this is that, you know, corruption like this, true systemic corruption, takes multiple hands doing multiple things. And, you know, this is my opinion, and please feel free to discuss down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but my belief is that in this day and age especially, and probably since the turn of the last century, that corruption really starts in the private sector, because that is where the profit motive is, that is where more of the resources are, especially now, than in government. That wasn't always the case, but I think that is definitely the case now. And so when there's a particular industry that has particular needs, and maybe the legal and regulatory environment aren't particularly friendly to those things, what's your first move? I mean, they say that the best money spent is usually, or the best investment is usually a politician. And that's basically how corruption then enters into government. So when government is trying to work and to advance policy, there's two things that it can do. It can either earn consent, by discussing it, by showing trials, by showing, why something is going to be, effective or not, or by creating it. The common term is manufacturing consent. And quite often that's used through propaganda of various different types, creating stories, creating events, creating things in order to make the issue appear to be more important than it is, and to where their remedy is going to be some sort of corrupt act or practice, whether it's identified as that or not. So when that happens, the government then opens the door for those corrupt acts and practices. If you're a chemical company that, in order to make your bottom line, work, requires you to spill tons and tons of chemical waste, into a waterway or something like that, you work really hard to make sure that you get that regulation removed so that your profit margin increases by the amount of pollution, or by the amount of not having to clean up that pollution that your company would have to be engaged in. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And that's this dance between corrupt corporate or industrial power and political power. So what's going on here? I think that it's pretty clear that, and I've said this a zillion times, that vulnerable communities are not causing all of the strife in our country. However, when you're able to create stories and we're able to create, scenarios and pump them up in the media as often as you can with the most powerful, portions of that media, you can create a narrative that makes it appear as though immigrants and LGBTQ and trans people are the problem, when that clearly isn't. Generally speaking, if you're not getting paid very well, it's because your boss isn't paying them, isn't paying you. It's straightforward. It's not the immigrant. It's not the person, who you don't even know, who's trying to access medical care in a completely separate state. So what is Palantir trying to do here? Well, by all these scenarios that are happening right now, we look at Los Angeles, and we look at what they call riots, what are demonstrations against people being assaulted, people like being removed from the country without due process, and all these other things, legitimate grievances that they're trying to get out into the public to say, hey, this is a problem. But by trying to paint it as something else, it offers an excuse to increase the surveillance state. It offers an excuse to increase the security presence, often in the form of National Guard, Marines. Martial law is something that doesn't seem too far off at this particular moment. Now, when you have that pretext, and then you go in and say, well, in order to keep you safe, we are going to do all this stuff together, all this information, in order to know where these people who are making you unsafe are, so that we can get rid of them and deport them and send them to El Salvador or whatever the case might be. You have to understand that when they are removing those people's civil rights, they're removing everybody's, including yours. So what does Palantir want with all this data? That's ultimately the question. It doesn't seem very far-fetched to think that whatever it is that they're trying to do is something that isn't necessarily going to be to our benefit. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to show that it's the exact opposite. But anyway, if you find this content valuable, please share. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with your comrades, share with your compatriots, and just help us get out there. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Hey all, become that person nobody dares to argue with. Hit like, subscribe, and that little bell button for notifications. Talk to you soon.